Welcome back to Movies TV Mag. I am Mick Meanus, your host with the most, and a very warm welcome to Wednesday's edition of the DCU Daily, the discourse towards the Snyderverse. The Snyder version of the DC Extended Universe, the DCEU, will never ever end. Now, I'm a big fan of Zack Snyder. I'm a fan of Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut. What an achievement. We did that. We made that happen. I helped a tiny, teeny, weeny bit by using my platform here on YouTube to push. And that was great, and I'm glad that we got it. I've got all three movies on physical media and digital media, and I can watch them whenever I want. I ignore whatever the gun bots say. I don't listen, because I'm an intelligent man with a high IQ. And I was brought up during a generation and decades where we just agreed to disagree. If we didn't like something, we shrugged our shoulders and we moved on. We do not live within that generation today. We do not live within that culture today. People saw what Snyder did with the DCEU and they had to destroy it. They had to take it down. They had to put a stop to it. And congratulations, those of you who only want to see bright colours and bad gags in your comic book movies. You did it. But what did you actually achieve in the long run? Movies like James Gunn's Superman. I don't blame Warner Brothers. I don't blame James Gunn. You're just giving the idiots what they asked for. We know what James Gunn thinks about this industry. We know that he said in the past 30, 40 years that the quality of film and television has declined. So he gets it. He can't make any film that he wants, so he has to deliver you the slop that you're demanding. So when Zack Snyder's 80 and Henry Cavill's 65 or whatever, people will still be demanding the restoration of the Snyderverse. And I say, go for it. And who knows, one day we may get that, we may not get that. But at least we've got those three beautiful movies. But the discourse around the Snyderverse and Zack Snyder, what he did with the DCEU and Watchmen, because that's part of the discourse as well, by the way. It's no different to the discourse around The Last Jedi in the Star Wars cinematic universe. Rian Johnson is a very talented writer-director, but what should never have happened, what was wrong, him being, forced, pigeonholed in J.J. Abrams' second movie of his trilogy. J.J. Abrams started a new trilogy, a sequel trilogy. You started it, mate. You should have finished it. J.J., you had no business leaving Star Wars when you kicked it off. You should have written the second movie and directed it. And the same with the third movie that you did. But because of what Rian did, you had to change things because of people's complaints. This is exactly what happened to the rest of the DCEU once Snyder left. Did Star Wars heal after JJ came back and tried to, backtrack on what Rian did? No. Rian Johnson would have written and directed three great Star Wars movies outside the Skywalker saga, which is exactly what should have happened. He should never have ever done The Last Jedi. He should never have been brought in to do whatever he wanted in the second movie or something what someone else started. That's the mistake. If Rian Johnson was allowed to do something original of his own in the Star Wars franchise, Star Wars wouldn't be where it is today. The mistake was Kathleen Kennedy's and not Rian Johnson's. If he made a Star Wars film outside of the Skywalker saga, I promise you, it would be a great movie. The problem is where he was placed. He was placed in the middle of something that maybe he wasn't much of a fan of. So he destabilized it. It's like what Snyder did with Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, because Snyder didn't have free reign over Man of Steel. That was really Christopher Nolan and especially David S. Goya's kind of film. It was David S. Goya's vision. So Snyder didn't decide to have Superman kill off Zod. That was a David Goya decision that Christopher Nolan himself was very, very nervous about. If you want to see how Snyder sees modern mythology, comic book, these characters, you can see it in Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. That's completely his dystopian vision of superheroes. And you people who didn't like that, you didn't like something different, it was just a separate take. But the mistake, of course, was trying to get Snyder to make something to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was a generic thing, a generic popular thing. What the Snyderverse should have been outside. It should have been like Burton's two Batman movies. It should have been like, Raimi's Spider-Man movies. It should have just been something outside. Something divorced of anything else. Not something that's competing with a generic franchise. And this is where WB made the mistake, right? You can't have Snyder competing with the MCU. But if you just allowed him, to do his own thing, maybe things would have been better. Because for me, Snyder's 4 DC movies, including Watchmen, are outstanding, right? But since Watchmen, there's been an attitude towards that where half the movie-going public hate him with a passion, right? And it's crazy when you look at Snyder. He's a softly spoken, nice, compassionate, charitable man, and people hate this guy with venom. It's absolutely insane. Snyder's films challenge people and make people kind of vile, horrible people for some reason, right? Because this is not a man who does anything wrong. He's not a criminal. He's not an abuser. He's adopted children from other countries. This is a great man and a talented man. So how you can hate this man is beyond me. I mean, what got Ryan Johnson even more hated was his public statements on social media. He really went for it when people were, really going for him after The Last Jedi. But as I say, if Ryan didn't make The Last Jedi, if Kathleen brought him in to do something separate from the Skywalker saga, because he is a talented guy, whether you want to admit that or not, I think he would have done something a lot better. But it was a mistake to get him to be working within the Skywalker saga, especially if you knew what he was going to do. Anyone could tell you, Mark Hamill himself, who's backtracked on all his statements now, was saying this is not how I feel Luke Skywalker would act and conduct himself. But maybe Ryan had a point. Luke Skywalker at this point is old. Maybe an old Luke Skywalker would be a little bit bitter and resentful about his life, right? Many older people are. But it's not what people wanted to see. Do you know what I mean? And there's elements of people who didn't want to see what Snyder did. What people have got to understand with the Snyderverse, it's just a version. It's not a definitive version of your Superman, of your Batman. You can still watch the Burton Batman. You can still watch the Nolan Batman. It doesn't cancel those out. So to be so angry about something new was ridiculous. But the discourse over the Snyderverse will never, ever end. I mean, and you can see it. There's actually people with journalistic platforms on social media vilely, being very creative with the accounting for Superman just to hammer over Snyder fans' heads. You see it. I've never seen a film, Superman's just made an extra dollar more than Man of Steel domestically or some nonsense like that. It's crazy. And they keep on going on about domestic. Look, Superman's done quite well. In fact, Superman's done really well domestically. And there's no argument about that. And I'm not going to argue that. And I was wrong. I said it wouldn't even reach 500 million. I explained myself. I, put my hands up yesterday. And that was important to do for me because I don't think people can trust me if I die on a hill, right? Got to be honest about your mistakes. You've got to put your hands up to your own mistakes. But yeah, the discourse will never end. There'll be the Snyder fans saying one thing. And the Snyder fans, and I'm a Snyder fan myself, but not a cultist, let's be clear about that. But they sometimes, the cultists, they attack other versions of Superman and Batman. Now that's not good because that kind of lends in to the hate that this group of fans get. And look, the cultists are just a minority. Most Snyder fans are good fans who love what they love. And if you love what you love, even if it's something that I don't love, I celebrate you. I celebrate that. But what you shouldn't do is take what other people love and try and screw it up. Now, we've seen a lot of Snyder fans attacking Superman. Now, what I tried to do was constructively criticise the film because I didn't like it. I didn't like what they did to Superman. I don't think you can make Superman relatable by making him physically weak. I think you have to challenge him emotionally, as I keep on saying. But this discourse will never, ever, ever end. And for me, I'm bored of it. I love the Snyderverse, but I don't need to defend it. Those 3 Snyder movies don't need defending. If you love them, that's great. If you don't love them, that's great as well. Everyone has a right to a subjective opinion, but it's the same opinions again and again and again. And this is what leads to toxicity. So it's never going to end. I mean, even if the Snyderverse was to be restored, the toxicity would grow and grow and grow. Some people call the Snyderverse fans toxic. Some people call the Gun Bros toxic. As I say, I don't get involved. I'm not interested in that. When I see it, I scroll past. Now and again, I'll respond and make fun of some of the takes. At the end of the day, I can constructively criticise what Snyder did, but it doesn't mean I don't love those films, the art, the stunningness of how they look, the storytelling. I love what Snyder did. Snyder made his own contemporary take on these DC characters, and it was great and it was brilliant. But it doesn't have to, just because someone has something to say about a certain bunch of characters, it doesn't mean it's a definitive vision. And some Snyder fans want to say things like this: Man of Steel is the best Superman film ever made. To you. To you. I still think Superman 78 is the best, and I think in terms of adaptation, Smallville is right alongside it. But it doesn't mean I don't love Man of Steel, BVS, and the Snyder Cut, but I think we have to be honest, right? It's a version. I enjoyed it. I personally think the Snyderverse is great, and it's difficult when you go on one of these, platforms. And I mean, every time I watch a Critical Drinker video, most times, or a Mauler video, they're going to get their punches in to the Snyderverse. Let's get it clear, those films sucked, in your opinion. In your opinion. It's not a factual statement. It's not a universal statement. It's your opinion. And why do you think those movies suck? Because they're not bad movies. Factually, they're not bad movies. It's just that Snyder happened to make contemporary movies, take some colour out of the palettes, and that's what upset you. Because you believe DC should be made a certain way. But if we take the power, the right away from creatives to do what they want to do, then we lose. If we stopped Cameron from making Terminator and Terminator 2, or if we stopped Stone from making JFK, which is a very controversial movie and makes some very controversial statements about the Kennedy assassination, if those movies were stopped when creatives had something to say, if we stopped Platoon, where would we be today? We wouldn't have an industry. It's very, very important that we allow artists, whether they're painters, whether they're musicians, whatever they are, playwrights, novelists, to have their say. We have every right as consumers and critics and even pundits to have our say. But our say should never destabilise an artist's freedom of artistic impression, artistic integrity. And that's what happened with the Snyderverse. Criticism put a stop to him making more. And that should never be a thing. Now, if the Snyderverse movies didn't make bank, which they did just about, right? Man of Steel, 670 million. Solid, not great, let's be honest. Batman vs Superman, I've spoken to people at WB. There was an ambition for about 2 billion from that movie, and you would expect that with Batman and Superman, in the same movie. It's like, basically Wolverine and Deadpool in the same movie did really well. That was their expectation. But the just near under 900 million was still okay. But it wasn't what they wanted. And Zack Snyder's Justice League did very, very well for HBO Max. It did. And, you know, people can... I've seen the figures. I'm one of the few people who've seen the true, factual figures. And I know that. So at the end of the day, what happened to the Snyderverse, the destabilization of the Snyderverse, was wrong. Because what it is, it's criticizing something so deeply and so horridly that the artist wasn't allowed to make any more art.